Good morning. On Monday, June 15th, we observed the feast of Evelyn Underhill, who's an English teacher, mystic, theologian. She was born in 1875, died in 1941. Some of you may have heard of or be familiar with her famous book, most famous book, entitled Mysticism. Evelyn Underhill was as I say, British. She struggled with the church for much of her life, partly because she felt that the institution and the institutional concerns about membership, about formalities, about intellectual engagement with theological issues had diverted the church from what she felt was its greatest gift and its most important mission, which was to make it possible for people to experience the presence of God. And so I have been very moved in reading her this week and rereading some of what she's written, because I think she gives us great guidance during this time when we're talking so much and trying to reimagine a church where we do not gather in person for worship and we do not share the sacraments. I want to first share the kind of theme of this morning, and the thing that I've come back to often this week is her statement: if God were small enough to be understood, he would not be big enough to be worshipped. If God were small enough to be understood, he would not be big enough to be worshipped. And so much of what we do is to give people the courage to be vulnerable enough to explore what they don't know and what they can never understand, trusting in its absolute goodness. Let me share some of her pithy sayings with you, which have spoken to me this week. My growth depends on my walls coming down. Love is creative. It does not flow along easy paths, spending itself in the attractive. It cuts new channels, goes where it is needed. Love is creative. It is not easy. And I love this one. Many Christians are like deaf people at a concert. They study the program carefully. They believe every statement made in it. They speak respectfully of the quality of the music, but only really hear a phrase now and again. So they have no notion at all of the mighty symphony which fills the universe, to which our lives are destined to make their tiny contribution, and which is the self-expression of the eternal God. How often do we prepare our services as if it were going to be an entertainment where people would feel comfortable and would provide distraction for people who are not able to be fully present because their minds are so busy, their souls are so sorrowful, they are so filled with regret and worry and shame? How often do we prepare our liturgies as if they were a concert for deaf people? Which isn't to say that it should not be done carefully, that the beauty of our liturgy and the profundity of our words and the beauty of our music are central to the form of worship that we offer. But it is always a gateway. It's always a training session so that people can tune into the true beauty of the universe in which God is fully present. If God were small enough to be understood, he would not be big enough to be worshipped. I want to focus on three things that Evelyn Underhill said about the church. Around 1930, she wrote a letter to the Archbishop of Canterbury, in which she expressed a fierce critique of the church and of the clergy, arguing that we had lost our sight of what our true purpose was, and we were too preoccupied with intellectual arguments, with formalities, even with social programming, and forgetting our primary purpose in this world, which is to guide people to a presence of God. So, her advice for the church which has been very helpful to me this week. First statement: the real hunger among people is not for halting attempts to reconcile theology and physical science, but for the deep things of the Spirit. So often, we talked about this last week, so often we feel the need to explain God, to prove that God exists, to provide a reason for what we do and what we don't do and why and how we do it. But Evelyn Underhill reminds us that we need to be here, to be present, with the courage and confidence to let God touch souls through us, souls that we ourselves might not see or understood. Second statement: we look to the church to give us an experience of God's mystery, holiness, and prayer. We look to the church to give us an experience of God, mystery, and prayer. We worry, I think, about how to be entertaining, particularly in this age of videotaping and Zoom. We worry about how we're going to engage people's attention in a culture that offers increasing numbers of attention-getting distractions. There are many messages competing for everyone's attention. And sometimes people want us just to repeat the same message that they've heard elsewhere. But we have something new to say. We have something new to offer. We have something different one anybody can find anywhere else. We are committed and commissioned to create an environment, a space, where people can get a glimpse of God, where people can experience, albeit briefly, the deep peace and trust that comes from the conviction that cannot be proven, that there is absolute good in the universe, and that we are agents and instruments of that goodness. It doesn't take language. It doesn't take eloquence. It doesn't take esoteric study. It takes the willingness to be still and to listen and to allow God to work through us. And then the third thing she says is, God is the interesting thing about religion, and people are hungry for God. God is the interesting thing about religion, and people are hungry for God. She reminds us that we feed hungry souls not by trying to be interesting, but by allowing the grace of God to flow through us. The hunger for God is not a hunger that can be satisfied, and we must teach each other the difference between this hunger for God, the compassionate hunger for justice and liberation and harmony and openness, as opposed to the hunger for comfort or recognition or affirmation, which, to be honest, motivates too much church programming. If God were small enough to be understood, he would not be big enough to worship. It is our grace and our task to lead each other into the infinite largeness and beauty of this world, because that is where we will experience God in the darkest corners of our own soul. It doesn't preclude social justice. It doesn't preclude social action. It doesn't preclude study. But the purpose of all of those activities is to bring us to the horizon where language no longer works, where our own needs and insecurities disappear. I want to end with a poem by Mary Oliver. It's entitled, What I Have Learned So Far. Meditation is old and honorable, so why should I not sit every morning of my life on the hillside looking into the shining world? Because, properly attended to, delight is as well as havoc is suggestion. Can one be passionate about the just, the ideal, the sublime, and the holy, and yet commit to no labor in its cause? I don't think so. All summations have a beginning. All effect has a story. All kindness begins with the sown seed. Thought buds toward radiance. The gospel of light is the crossroads of indolence or action. Be ignited or be gone. For if God were small enough to be understood, he would not be big enough to be worshipped. Amen.